Speaking of things that split hairs, emissions targets. And I guess this sort of helps with the fact that the Prime Minister is a bit out of the loop when it comes to the news cycle here in Australia. But there's a great exclusive by Dennis Shanahan and Greg Brown on the Oz tomorrow. Coalition split on emissions target. Liberal MP Dave Sharma has backed Australia committing to an emissions reduction target of 45% by 2035. In a fracturing of the Coalition Party room ahead of a key global climate change conference in November. The push for the greater ambition comes as Scott Morrison seeks to persuade the leaders of India and Japan to look beyond the adoption of targets at this week's first face-to-face meeting of the Quad in Washington. Look, I do love the messiness of and the tea that is spilt from the Coalition Party room meeting, Sarah. What are you hearing on the ground? Has Dave Sharma really gone rogue, or is he just sort of trying to plant a bit of a seed to get people talking, specifically those rogue backbenchers that don't like talking about climate emissions?
I think probably the latter, not potentially rogue, but trying to put a thought bubble out there. I mean, I only say that I think because Sharma's sort of done that on a few things before. I find he has these points that actually are, quite well thought through, and they might be a speech, but he doesn't sort of. I think he does it in quite a good way, personally. But it is going to be interesting to see how that shakes out because of obviously the Nationals and where we've seen the Coalition Party room in recent months, just any talk of 2050, particularly after that intergovernmental report on climate change, has just been, you can hear not just in their words, but how they say, show me the evidence and all of that from the Nats. There's a real just adversity to targets. And it is going to be interesting to see because like that Oz report said, Australia is, Morrison is in America now with Japan, India and the US. And we know that Biden has made very clear from the moment he came to office that he's going to shape his foreign policy based on countries' climate ambition. Now, I'm not sure if it's a coincidence or not, but Morrison hasn't got that much face-to-face time or, phone calls from Biden, and there's been a bit of radio silence between calls, and definitely a lot of commentators have raised an eyebrow about that. I think how this is all going to play out in the next few days in the US is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, that pal from down under for sure. Hopefully he remembers his name by the time he gets to New York. Over to the Financial Review and a story that's really piqued my interest, obviously being based here in WA. The ASX sinks as iron ore tests US $90 a tonne. Australian shares had their worst session since February, losing more than 2% yesterday as the price of iron ore traded in the futures market sank to a US $90 a tonne, extending the collapse of the economy's top export to more than 60% from its May peak. The relentless pace of iron ore's decline has strategists at a loss as to when producers might see a reprieve, inflicting further pain on the major miners, which fell by more than 3% on the ASX and the national accounts. Just here in WA, so you'd be aware that even the WA Treasury only a couple of weeks ago handed down their budget, and now they're being forced to scramble to say like forward estimates, even in 12 months, maybe having to rejig their iron ore estimation because it was sitting at 121 and now it's at 90. I guess the iron ore hiccups, is this just a wider picture of the disgruntled Chinese market?
Yeah, look, I mean, in the federal budget, there's always been that expectation that the value of iron ore will decline, but a lot more steadily than this has occurred. So it kind of was a very, basic graph projecting downwards as Brazil comes back online, etc. But this has been more of a shock. And I think that's actually a bit worrying and a bit scary because the story that we've heard for the last few months is, look how surprising, unexpected and fantastic this really high iron ore price is, right? And it's the first time in a long time that we have got this real, economic shock. And it's going to be interesting because often, here in federal parliament, when we see some surprisingly good numbers in the bottom line of the government and so on, us from the West Bureau, we always ask, hey, how's the really high price of iron ore, played into that? How has the WA mining sector played into that? Now I'm interested to see how that's going to shift, if these numbers are going to be less, positive and unexpected, And if we're really going to feel the sting of that sharp decline when we start looking at some of the national figures.